Gate may preserve a memory that when eventually Master of London, Canute incorporated his ditch of 1016 into a recovery and rehabilitation of the Roman defences of the city. And lastly, we come and there some coins of Canute en passant. We lastly come to Billingsgate, Thameside Billingsgate. Here's the Thames and here's London Bridge. Here's St Botolph's in its 17th century rehabilitation. The church, the medieval church, lies very, very near to Pudding Lane, the source of the Great Fire, and the church was indeed burnt in the fire and was rebuilt. St Botolph's came into possession of the Dean and Chapter of St Paul's in 1194, so it's already there in 1194. And if, as seems likely, St George's parish to the east was taken out from an earlier parish of which St Mary Hill, further east, was itself detached, this may have been quite an ancient parish, stretching as far north as the main spinal route across the medieval city. Botolph's Fish Market, the Billingsgate, lay just east of London Bridge, and at the entrance to the bridge was the Church of St Magnus, again with Scandinavian connections. However, perhaps more important than the fish market, although the fish market itself, of course, is bringing in produce from the North Sea, is Botolph's Wharf, called the New Wharf on some maps, but very close to London Bridge and therefore central to London's trade and therefore its wealth. Moving from the London churches to the others in Botolph's English realm, if we're looking for things which places with Botolph churches have in common, the place names, their topology, their distribution, these give little away as yet. So, for example, a comparison with a control group of places, the same number of places, chosen at random from Standard Gazetteers, reveals very little. There are fewer tune names and more ham names. These will be familiar to etymologists. Putting the two categories together produces rather pretty well the same proportion in both groups, and what discrepancy there is probably due to the prevalence of ham names in East Anglia. Turning to Doomsday data, 12 of the 64 places with Botolph churches had the king as one or the only lord in 1086, and that looks a suggestively high proportion. So, place mark that. Looking at the other English churches of Botolph as mapped at 6 inches to the mile in the 1880s, I'm getting out of sync with the slides here, so I mustn't... looking at the other English churches of Botolph as mapped, as I say, in the 1880s at large scale, it's noticeable really how insignificant, I'm sorry about this, but how relatively insignificant almost all of them are. and how many fewer occur at bridges or on Roman roads than customary ideas would have us believe. Some do, and so a particular interest are those which are adjacent to places called Streatham or so-and-so Street. Though, of course, other parishes with other saints have the same profile. That's the problem. If you say, oh well, St Botolph's on the road, it must be to do with. Then, well, what about St Andrew across the other side of the road? So one has to be careful. And I'm also struck by the absence of Botolph from the long list of medieval guilds in Norfolk, with the one exception of Stow Bardolph parish, whose parochial dedication, Holy Trinity, may well be late medieval, masking an earlier patron in the onomatopoeic, yes, Botolph. The question is, if Botolph was so popular, why were people not founding guilds for his, or establishing altars, or endowing churches with images in his commemoration? Janet Cooper has noticed a similar absence of side altars and so on from Essex. And in Yorkshire, a single guild is known, and that's at Bossall, and probably related to an interpretation of the place name, which may or may not include the personal name Botolph. So, no real evidence of popular veneration. The gate churches, of course, are exceptionally interesting, but on their own, do they justify a blanket description of Botolph as a traveller saint? I'm not convinced. Giles and Christopher, for example, are way ahead in that race. The evidence drives us back, I think, to kingship. If Canute was ever on a shore, frustrated at the tide, it would have been in the context of the defence of his North Sea empire. It may be better to view Botolph's churches, those at the gates of major eastern towns and at key points on major ways as a reflection of royal interest in Botolph's patronage, not as a saint of gates and fords in general, but as an icon of Anglian power, friend of kings, guarding strategic routes between between London and North Sea havens, and interpretation of some Botolph parishes as marking boundaries of early small Middle Anglian kingdoms likewise focuses on a strategic role in defence of territory. Though at earlier centuries than the ones that I've been concentrating on, and perhaps deriving from aspects of Botolph's life and career that are presently not clear to us. A particularly interesting Botolph dedication is that at Botolph Bridge, Peterborough. It was royal demesne in 1066, and I suspect that the name, the place name, points rather not so much to a bridge, but to a causeway, as perhaps Father Tim's Botolph Bridge in Kent may in fact do, crossing the marsh. Certainly the Nene and Welland crossings were strategic. We have only to remember Harold's victory at Samford en route to Hastings. All Saints Botolph Bridge, now demolished, but the site is mapped, and it stood on the Nene, depending on which part of Northamptonshire you're from. It stood opposite Longthorpe, again, with Botolph as patron. And adjacent, if you look at the 1880s large-scale ordnance survey, you can see that an adjacent north-south route crosses the river and is preserved by hedge lines, which span a number of parishes, and it's clearly a route line diverging from Ermine Street, cutting off the corner with King Street. I hope you're familiar with these Roman roads, and in fact running north in a sort of shortcut towards the navigable Welland at Peakirk, Botolph at neighbouring Helpston, or further on to Boston and its harbour, and then eventually a Lincolnshire haven like Saltfleet, again, Botolph. So it might depend on whether urgency, to what extent urgency demanded a forced march rather than taking the ship. And finally, at local level, there's an intriguing subset of Botolph parishes. Those which have had or now have other patronal saints. Now, some scholars dismiss the study of dedications on the grounds that they're subject to change. It's impossible in most cases to get at the so-called original dedication. Of course, there's no such thing as an original dedication. Dedication is what it is at the time it's recorded. The answer is that maybe 4/5 of medieval dedications survive till today, and that known changes are themselves interesting and often significant. So indeed it proves with Botolph. A group of Midland churches have switched between Botolph and John, or specifically John the Baptist, or to or from Peter or Peter and Paul, and in one case to Paul. The Feast of Peter and Paul, as you well know, is June the 29th. When the New Style calendar was adopted, of course, as we all know, there were riots with people shouting, give us back our 13 days. Well, 13 days from Botolph's feast is June the 30th, and many parish feasts shifted forward 13 days and adopted new patronal links, and it's a reasonable guess that Peter and or Paul were adopted, though one day out, because of their importance. Shifts involving John the Baptist, and probably those which reference simply John without specifying the Baptist or the evangelist, move the parish feast forward 1 week to coincide with the midsummer feast of John's Nativity. 3 days after the longest day of the year, June the 21st. Those of you who are familiar with Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and in parts of Germany will know that Midsummer is still celebrated with bonfires and dancing around midsummer poles. So, a thought to leave you with. When Canute's missionaries arrived in Scandinavia, they were already familiar with Midsummer or St. John's fires, which were kept up in this country until the 16th century and sometimes later. A feature probably abandoned by the time of Canute and the previous century in England was the myth of the slaying by the dart of a mistletoe of Odin and Freya's son Balder, who would be reborn at Yule. John Toye's conclusion that veneration of Botolph had more to do with the date than the saint may be pointing in perhaps the correct direction. For farmers, it was time to harrow the fields and plant the turnips. But the whole community, the helpful saint, the help wolf, whose anniversary was 4 days before Midsummer, with the translation feast in December, and whose cult was backed by the king, may have seemed a fit substitute for Balder, or at least to open a fit saint to open the seasonal festivities. 2 centuries later than Canute, the Icelandic writer Snorri Sturluson wrote of Balder, and I think it may be a text appropriate for our saint. There is nothing but good to be told of him. He is the best of them, and everyone sings his praises.
Well, thank you very much, Graham. That gives us great scope for thought. Didn't agree with everything said, that's for sure. However, I know that Graham is happy to take questions, so who would like to start?
Fire away.
I was struck seeing the old gate, the London churches, with their very narrow parishes running along the parallel with the Roman wall. It's exactly like our St Bottles Priory in Colchester, where the priory was built just outside the south gate of the Roman walls, and Priory Street ran along, and that was the parish. I was born in Priory Street, and Priory Street curls along exactly like the streets following the outside, and that was the long, narrow parish of St Paul's. It's an exact parallel.
Is it possible, given the location outside the gates of cities, that the parishes were actually formed for markets? That's where the markets were?
I'm sure that is the case, and but then Botolph would not be alone in that. So,
no, but it just it seems to me that a lot of the places where you have bottles are at gates, or at ports, and the parishes do seem to be designed almost as market streets.
Mm. Yes, it's attractive, and I'm sure proves to be the case. But one would then have to say, well, yes, we have X number of marketplaces, and of these, the Botolph examples only provide for 2 or 3%.
It's interesting in that respect that the parable of the talents is the proper for the Botolph office. What was the date for that Botolph office?
I'll come back to you on that.
Thank you.
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it?
The most mercantile of the parables.
Yes. These early liturgical texts, the choice of the lessons and the wording, but often gives lots of clues as to what's the saint. It's not who the saint was; it's what the saint is representing. Absolutely right. Yeah.
What do you make about that? The one in London, I used to work in Great Tower Street near the tower, and Billingsgate Fish Market was here, and there was one near there, and of course further up is Leadenhall Market.
And
So
Smithfield
right.
Market,
Yeah.
and they're all they're all next to markets.
Yeah.
I think that they were founded for commercial administration.
Yeah.
I really do.
Of course, it would be a centre of the community anyway, wouldn't it, for the markets, for eating and all the other factors. And then with the community meeting there, of course, then it would be an obvious place for St Botolph's to visit as well.
Yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to King Offa getting to be great buddies with Charlemagne and bringing the Merovingian system of giving royal charters and markets and fairs to the church, and borough towns for that matter, for defence, to get the church to basically raise taxes for you.
Yeah.
Which is what I think was really important.
I think that can apply to, obviously, applies to London, but somewhere out in the middle of the country where I am from, there's no obvious connection of that sort. We're
There's
not,
none.
not on a Roman
No
road,
connection with
not
that
on a
sort
major
of
river
text.
crossing, and so
It's a
on.
right
And so,
Yeah.
it's a good pattern for a
I
city,
think it's
perhaps,
everywhere.
but it doesn't apply throughout.
It's in Port Olsen, Northampton, in Church Brampton, I mean, there is no,
That's right.
there's no port there.
It's very helpful, I think, to read a text like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle as a narrative and to note how busy these guys were marching up and down the routes, particularly Canute in the east. You know, how many is it? It was 3 times the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle says, Canute returns to England. He doesn't come via Southampton, he doesn't come via Liverpool,
Yeah.
he's coming from the east.
I did notice the one down East St Botolph's Church is in Scotland, and yet Norway is
Yes,
fairly near.
yes, yes, yes. And the North Sea dimension, I
And
think,
the
is...
use of the word Kirk, I noticed that,
Oh, yes.
of course, clearly the derivation is the Danish side of things, because we call them a Kirk up there rather than church.
It was interesting in Bergen Vestland in Norway, because I was up there last year, and I went to Lufot Mines, which are quite close, and found a little Norman church there, and we went to look round it, that church, and the lady said, "You want to know who it was dedicated to?" I said yes. She said, "St Thomas of Canterbury." The priest who set up that church had studied in Paris with Thomas Becket and built the church about the time. And so these things have very strange ways of arriving, as
Oh,
it
yes.
were.
Oh, yes.
So I've
Oh,
not
yes.
been to Berndesterland, no, let's go.
Yes.
I think our church in Hadstock is a little bit different to most, and the fact that we've only got a community today of 320. It probably had 400, about 100 years ago.
But
When that
it's never
church
been
was
that
built,
much
the
bigger.
population was incredibly small. It was agriculture. There was a
Same
market.
as ours, yeah.
There was a market. When you look at this church, and even today, you wonder why there's such a large church built in this particular area. It's huge for the area.
We do have an early reference to St Botolph's Day in that the first, I think it was, confirmed as it had been in the day King Edward was alive and dead, Hadstock had the right to have a fair upon St Botolph's Day, the 17th of June. We're the only Botolph parish in this country that has a royal charter with a right to a festival upon St Botolph's Day. I also had a visit from a gentleman rejoicing in the name of Botolphson from Oslo, who told me that Botolph is still the patron saint of seamen and travellers in his country, and the Dean of Aalborg at the time, the late Borg Rosen, informed me that Botolph in Denmark is still the patron saint of seamen and travellers.
I was going to ask, how convinced are we that bot is good or remedy rather than boat? Because I always thought bot was boat, and that Botolph was the patron saint of boatmen, as he was in London.
No, but you know that the old, now we don't use the phrase now, do we? What boots it to do what or the other?
As in
What?
walking. As in walking.
No.
No, it
No,
isn't
but
good.
what point is there in it? What good does it do?
But you did. But
And
the Saxon word for boatman was boatskarl.
yeah, but I think the linguists would say that the name element is this what for good or helpful or needful. It gives the phrases relating to use of woodland resources, house boot, house bot, fire bot, hedge bot.
So are we suggesting, Graham, that the name was not his given name, that this was a name that was given, but when he had acquired a reputation for being helpful or whatever, was his...
There are umpteen examples of people with names similar to Botolph
Did he grow into his name?
He may well after
or was it because he was
posthumously
helpful,
he might have done.
the name was given. Yes. Because I was going to say, because this brings up the question of his question mark Scottish origin, because his name of Botolph doesn't fit in at all with the Scottish names. But if he was given another name to start off with, and that was his first name, and then once he became matured, as it were, and his activity of being a boat helper or a health situation, then maybe he was given a nickname, shall we say, which was Botolph.
Certainly names carry meanings that were not intended by the parents christening the child.
Right.
The Mercian Saint Werbera is found at churches on the Danelaw boundary, at places where indeed the name guardian of the city or guardian of the tune or guardian of the borough, where Werbera might well have been appropriate and helpful in the context of the reconquest of Danelaw around 900. So names carry meaning.
I was struck by when there was a mention of having a brother Adolf.
Yeah.
And very often you get groups of family names handed down which are very similar. They start with a B, or their sons and daughters are named with a B. Burrard and Burford and so
Or,
on.
as in this case, have Wolf as the second.
Wolf
the
as
second.
the-
Or titles and names get confused. I mean, this is a great picture for it. Elgitha just means queen.
Yeah.
That's actually Emma of Normandy there.
Yeah.
And you've got her labelled as not being his wife and being called
That's
Elgitha,
right. Yeah.
when in fact that's actually Emma of Normandy who is
Yeah.
his wife.
Yeah.
Can we just take perhaps one or maybe two more questions, and then we must round things up, I think.
I
Yes.
wanted to know what the preaching side of it. There wasn't a great deal of mention of the preaching side of his efforts.
No, and that's what hampers us, isn't it? We have so very little.
I mean, spreading the word and
Yeah, of his career. We know, of course, that he was called in by Wulfhere of Mercia to establish a monastery at Much Wenlock in today's Shropshire for one of Wulfhere's daughters. His reach must have been quite extensive. Shelfrith comes down from the north to learn what lessons he can from Botolph's continental experience. We're beginning to know a little more about East Anglia in the 7th and 8th centuries than we've previously done, thanks to archaeology. We're beginning to recognise monastic sites in East Anglia, scriptoria, trading posts, clearly a place of great wealth. So maybe we should tease out some more about his at least his times, if not his career.
Derek, did you have a question?
Yeah, just want to take you back to that calendar which showed the turnip. I think you said it was 18th century.
Yeah.
I'm interested in the runic symbols.
Yeah.
What were runic symbols doing in an 18th century manuscript?
Because they're used into the Middle Ages and beyond.
Ah, right. And they are
Runes we think of them as runes as dark.
I do indeed, yes. And they were they just numbers, or they were?
It's still being used. Runes are still being used. Yeah. Late into the Middle Ages.
I think Crocky has one last comment, which I couldn't answer.
It was Botolph's successor abbot, according to the early charters of that part of the world, who gave the land from Ekenhoe to found Much Wenlock. Ethelhay, he was the one who chartered the land for the foundation of Much Wenlock, Botolph had a great reputation for his learning, and according to one of the early lives, he was a sick man for quite a lot of his life, and people came to Botolph to learn from him. As, for example, Biscop sent his abbot to learn about the Benedictine rule from St Botolph. So why does Biscop get the reputation of being the one who founded the Benedictine order over here? He appears to have sent somebody to learn about it from Botolph.
Well, indeed, I think we've been fortunate today to hear from Graham, so learned and so knowledgeable about things that we're all interested in, and put everything across so well with his lovely slides. So